There was a thumbnail that caught my attention, which is that Tucker Carlson, the controversial former Fox News presenter, is in Moscow and he's going to interview Putin, apparently. Um, Now, this isn't really surprising to me, but it's sickening, and I'll explain why. Carlson, a bit like his hero Donald Trump, is a liar. My basis for that is the fact that he is saying he's coming in this with false intentions. He's portraying it as, oh well, I'm a journalist and it's my job to do this, and we have to show the American people Putin's perspective because they've never heard it, and he's sort of taking the angle of it's objective journalism. That's a lie. It's absolutely not. Tucker Carlson's a Putin supporter. He's made that pretty damn clear with his positions on the war in Ukraine and with his advocacy of Putinism in recent years. So if anyone is so foolish as to think that this interview will be objective and he'll simply ask the tough questions and the necessary questions, I think that's delusional. Um, it's a piece of Putin propaganda, and that's all it is. Now, there's a few things to consider with it. Firstly, is a false narrative that Putin's never had a voice in the West. That is a lie, because he has. I've seen interviews with Putin from the BBC and from other Western sources on several occasions. Putin, of course, has been in power for a long time. He's had several interviews with the West when he's agreed to them. So this idea that he's never been given a voice is a simple lie. More broadly, that Russia is the victim narrative is nonsense because Russia was invited into the G8. It was treated as an equal partner. And, what it comes down to is either all these American presidents and British prime ministers, they're all wrong and it's all a big plot to stop Putin, or the Russian tyrant is right. Um, and the Russian tyrant is right. That's just nonsensical. The idea that it's pure Putin. He's the victim. It's just this all. It's a big Western plot to keep Russia down. Um, I do not trust for one second that this interview will be objective. I do not believe that Carlson will ask important questions such as, Mr. President, why is it Russian dissidents are in jail? Why is it so many of your critics have ended up poisoned or murdered? Carlson will not ask those questions because he's a fanboy. Um, Apparently, it will be streamed on his platform. But I don't know whether I'll watch it or not. If I could bring myself to watch it, it will be just basically a groveling session. A bit like when Oliver Stone visited Putin. He's another Putin supporter, or at best, Putin apologist. I am so sick of these Western stooges for Putin, and I'm sick of the false narrative. I mean, Carlson is crying because he's been kicked out of Fox News, but the man is just a disgrace to journalism. I mean, my goodness, to be kicked out of Fox News takes some doing. Um, I really have no respect for so-called journalists like Carlson. I mean, he's a propagandist. It's not journalism. Journalism would be to ask Putin those tough questions, but he's not going to do so. Now, maybe I'll be proved wrong. Maybe Carlson will take a robust approach and say, how do you justify what your forces have done in Ukraine? How do you justify the alleged massacres? I mean, alleged, we have to use that journalistic diplomacy, massacres in Bucha, Kramatorsk, Mariupol. But Carlson's a Putin supporter, so that's not something he's going to do. And this is the fundamental point. He's coming with this premise that he's just a journalist doing his job. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think he's pro Putin, and I think his agenda here is to push out a false narrative, um, because he's anti Biden and he's anti Biden supporting the Ukrainians. Carlson will, of course, not interview President Zelensky. So, for all his talk about objectivity and doing his job as a journalist, it's pretty damn clear that he has an agenda. Um, and he can say what he wants about the mainstream media, but the fact of the matter is, when you look at Russia and you look at the West, look at the number of Russian journalists who have, strayed away from the Russian mainstream. This is something we never hear about. The Russian mainstream media, they end up dead. Anna Politkovskaya is just one example. Um, so I want to vomit, quite frankly, hearing this narrative because it's a false narrative. That's the point. This is not just a case of I'm a journalist doing my job. That is just BS, and Carlson knows it. I've never liked the guy, but that's beside the point. The point here is what he is saying is empirically false because he's implying that it's going to be objective, and it clearly isn't. Because his positions over the years on this issue show that he will be going in there with an agenda. He's not just reporting the news. He's not just giving and trying to inform people as he claims. I suppose you could argue it's a bit more information on Putin's lies. Um, but unfortunately, the world right now has a lot of liars in powerful positions. The Russian tyrant, of course, in America, Trump. It's a very cynical time, I think, for leadership in this world. And um, unfortunately, a lot of people will be lapping this up and saying, oh, well, he's doing two fingers to the mainstream media. But I would ask those people, are you going to be holding the same standards for Russian journalists who question Putin? Because they can't, right? So the hypocrisy of those who berate the mainstream media in the West, yet they turn a blind eye to the absolute lack of press freedom in Russia. I mean, it's non-existent. Western media is flawed, but it's diverse, and there's many different opinions. There's just no comparison with the situation in Russia. Um, but yeah, I think Carlson and his kind are just a disgrace to journalism. I mean, I've also quoted The Hill, Kim Iverson and others that work for The Hill. Just these Putin propagandists are beneath contempt, in my opinion, because whilst the courageous Ukrainian people are fighting for their lives, fighting for their country, millions literally have been displaced, injured, rendered homeless, killed, tortured. Then you have these Western lackeys for the Russian tyrant knowingly and willingly pushing his propaganda. I want to vomit. I want to vomit. And unfortunately, a lot of people are taken in by it. But let's be very clear. Tucker Carlson may lose his position at Fox, but he's never going to end up poisoned because he criticizes Biden. That's a fundamental difference, and that's what he will not acknowledge. He can say anything he wants about Biden, and that's fine. That's journalism. That's freedom of the press. That's free speech. And yet he's in Russia to defend the Russian tyrant, and I see it as defense. I don't see it as an interview. I see it as a propaganda exercise. Um, but it's a false narrative because Putin has been interviewed actually. So this idea that he's never been allowed a voice, Putin has repeatedly regurgitated his nonsense over the years to Western journalists, and he was allowed to do so. It was an interview. Um, but maybe what Carlson's really saying is, oh, my other journalists in the West don't grovel to Putin the way I will. And that's what he's going to do. Now, he claims that we're not going to encourage you to agree with what the Russian president might say, but it's a propaganda exercise, and anyone foolish enough to not see that is, I want to throw up, but I thought it was important to put this out there. I'm well aware that this video might attract some other Putin lackeys. Bring it on, and I've never beat around the bush with this. I've no respect for them. I think if you support Putin and you live in the West and you're a British citizen or an American citizen or a Canadian citizen, you're basically a traitor. That's how I feel. And you may not have actually committed any offences against the state, but your position is morally contemptible, and I think it should be stigmatized. That's how I feel. So yeah, I just want to put it out there. I do not think this is some objective exercise. I think it is just another piece of propaganda for the Russian tyrant, and it's a disgrace. A lackey like Tucker Carlson is doing this. Where's his interviews with Ukrainian displaced Ukrainians? He will never do that because it's not part of his agenda to do so.